Hi, welcome to the lesson about monitoring and alerting. So, as a data engineer, you may be thinking that all that touches these parts of monitoring, alerting, that's something that will be made or implemented by DevOps or maybe data ops guys. But believe me that as an author of the data processing code, you are the best person to define any monitoring or any alert metrics, of course, after speaking with business owners or business end users of the data you are generating. And yeah, that's something a little bit funny because you may be thinking that when you turn off or alert or you don't implement the dashboarding at all, your life will be easier. But in fact, it will just make you blind because you will not know what's happening with your code, with your data, with your infrastructure. And when an end user will ask you, hey, why I have here twice less data than yesterday, or why I have here twice more data than yesterday, well, you will not know whether it comes from a failed job or from a job that restarted or had a lot of restarts. So generally, you will not be able to operationalize your pipeline and your work. You will not maybe annoyed daily because believe me, when you have dashboards and alerts, you check them daily to ensure that everything works as expected and that you detect any issue as soon as possible. When you don't have them, you don't look at dashboards and alerts, but on the other hand, you may see errors on issues long time after they happen, so like weeks or hopefully not, but maybe months. And in that case, if the data is completely wrong, your end user may ask you to reprocess it, and yeah, it involves some pain because reprocessing is always painful, even though you automated that. There is a lot of data to process after all. It can break, so there is kind of risk stress on you that you have to check and ensure that the data reprocessing is working smoothly also. And yeah, generally, sooner you detect an issue, sooner you fix it, I think that better your life and your end users will be. And you can do that without monitoring and alerting. And to illustrate my sayings, there is a lack of monitoring, so we can imagine that we generated less data than previous days, and without the monitoring, well, we say that is just fine. There is a fire in the room, but we don't know, we don't feel it. And the same happens for alerting. So again, we generate less data, but here we are lucky guys, we have dashboards. But when you don't have automated alerts, you will find yourself or visiting these alerts multiple times a day and refreshing the page to see whether everything is working as expected. And it will be very annoying and disturbing in your work, and probably it will not be very productive. You will be not employed for refreshing dashboards. You will be employed for automating any alerting stuff. So as a consequence, if you don't have monitoring, alerting, or both, you lack of visibility. So your system is maybe working correctly. Human fatigue is for the tedious verifications, as I showed you previously. You will refresh the dashboards very often. That it will probably tire you in the end. Bad data is one of the consequences because internal users can get poor data. But there's even worse. If you are processing data on behalf of external customers, external users that pay you for that, well, your company will be simply blamed because they will also receive fake data and maybe they will generate some business value on their side from this data. And if it's all fake, well, your reputation will suffer and probably your budget, your finance too. And of course, there is also technical environment degradation. There will be much more data errors related to the bugs, much more data errors related, much more bad decision taken by the lack of visibility, but by the bad data ingested to downstream customers. So there is a lot of serious consequences for you, for your team, for your business, and for your end users, even though they stay internal to the company. So how to implement these two parts, monitoring and alerting? We have our data pipeline and a happy person. So There are different places for the dashboards. We can implement them on top of data processing layer. So for example, here we can, if we are filtering some data, we can also memorize the ratio of input and output records, so that we know whether suddenly our filter become too aggressive. On the other hand, when you on the data store, we will all typically monitor things like volumes, like maybe latency for the incoming data, and most something that is static to the data that is already stored there. We can trigger alerts on both parts, not necessarily for the same thing, but of course they will be triggered and implemented probably with the same technology. So yeah, that's a quite summary for what I've said before. Data processing, it will very probably require custom code. It will be very job specific, like as I said before, for the filters, but also for the errors, number of retries per task, per job, execution type per task, so that you can also see your performance degrading in case of any release you have made previously. And that's maybe all. And for the data store, as I said, it will be more static, more related to the data that is already stored, number of rows, throughput, queries per second if it's data stored that is queried by other consumers, timeouted requests, maybe statuses, and any other thing that is available that way. So that's all for this lesson, but remember, even though I didn't talk about monitoring and alerting for dozens of minutes, it doesn't mean they are not important at all. They are as important as your data processing code, as the data correctness you are generating with all software engineering best practices, because without the monitoring and alerting, you become blind and you generally don't know what's going on. You don't know if your data is correct, you don't know if the consumer is reading data as expected, you don't know if the data is even written to your output database. You don't know anything generally. So if you want sleep better, think about this monitoring and alerting parts as soon as possible in your pipeline, and also implement the automated alerts to avoid human fatigue for verifying whether everything is working as expected. So thanks for watching and see you in the next lesson.